Welcome to Category Visionaries, the show dedicated to exploring exciting visions for the future from the founders who are on the front lines building it. In each episode, we'll speak with a visionary founder who's building a new category or reimagining an existing one. We'll learn about the problem they solve, how their technology works, and unpack their vision for the future. I'm your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines Media. Now let's dive right into today's episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Category Visionaries. Today we're speaking with Kristen Valdes, CEO and founder of B.well, a digital health platform that's raised over $100 million in funding. Kristen, how are you?
I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Super excited to have you. Let's go ahead and talk about the big aha moment that led to you founding the company.
Absolutely. So I like to say, I feel like sometimes I'm the oldest person in the startup game. I had a 20-year career in healthcare as an executive prior to founding B.well. I had a healthcare executive role at CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Then I helped to start one of the country's first private Medicare Advantage plans, had the unique opportunity to help build a health plan from the ground up, sold that to United Healthcare, stayed on there for many years. And during the time that I was building XL Health and was at United, I was building my family. And here I was, this healthcare industry, quote unquote expert. I always say quotes because by the time you think you've learned healthcare, it turns on itself, changes completely. You have to learn it all over again. But I could not navigate the healthcare delivery system for my own child. So I have a child that was born with a very significant autoimmune condition. And it took me 7.5 years to get her diagnosed. I was the one who found her diagnosis, and I'm not a clinician. And then she had her first near fatal incident because 2 EMR systems couldn't talk to each other. She was prescribed a routine medication from a pediatrician for a sinus infection that was contraindicated to a disease that I was unaware she had even been diagnosed with, sitting in a specialty system that didn't have a patient-facing portal. And so there was no way as her mom I could have known that or protected her when, ironically, I was the person responsible for running drug-to-drug and drug-to-disease contraindication algorithms for health plans across 12 states. And so I felt like we had just completely missed the boat on giving consumers and their families the tools they need to be active participants in their own healthcare.
And why is that? Why is the system so broken?
How long do you have? I tell people all the time, like, healthcare is like the Hotel California, right? You can check out anytime you want, but you can never really leave because we all become patients at some point in our lives and we go back to being consumers. It's broken for let's just say, I actually will take the controversial take. It's not broken. It's operating exactly as we designed it. And we designed it wrong. And we didn't design it for preventative and holistic care, for keeping people well. It's a sick care system. And that's how the payments and the reimbursements are. And then we grew up in technology and allowed people to take data and hold it as a proprietary asset versus making, not competing on data, but actually competing on quality and health and value to the people that we serve. So the exciting part, and I'm an optimist by nature, is that these things are rapidly changing now, and we're in a transformational period in healthcare, unlike any that we've seen before, but it's slow and it's bureaucratic. And there's a lot of people making a lot of money trying to pull things back in the direction where they're, fat and happy. So, there's a lot of change going on. But I would say creation over the last 10 years, there's an organization called the Caring Alliance. I sit as a board director of that Caring Alliance. It was formed by former Governor Mike Leavitt and former CTO of the US government, Anish Chopra. And it was designed as a private-public partnership to pull together big tech companies. So Google, Microsoft, Apple, big payers and insurers like Humana, and big health systems, as well as third-party applications and the federal government, HHS, ONC, CMS, the VA. And we all came together under private-public partnership to say, okay, what do we need to do in order to solve for these healthcare problems and create an innovation ecosystem, basically opening up opportunities for everybody looking to move into health tech or digital health? How do we get more competition? And the answer was transparency. And so over the last 10 years, we've helped the government to pass over 3.5 dozen different federal rules aimed at creation of a shoppable healthcare consumer. Everything from data transparency of your medical record, your payer records, to provider directory transparency, to pricing transparency, to prior auth transparency. And they're not going to stop until we get all the way to the point where we're no longer competing on data, but we're actually competing on value.
So you mentioned there, the system is operating the exact way it's designed to do. If you could just tear the whole system down, rebuild it from scratch, how would you design it? Or maybe that's like a heavy question to, a short answer here in a podcast. But like, what would be like the pillars of that new system that you would design from scratch in a perfect world?
Well, one, we would build up and require architecture that is interoperable across all of the fragmentation of healthcare. Healthcare is highly, highly fragmented. It's estimated, in fact, that the average person has their healthcare data in 70 different disparate systems and locations. So we don't take that data with us. It doesn't carry forward with us. It's highly protected information, as it should be because of HIPAA. But from an incentive perspective, we need to think about the things that actually keep people well, and also the things that are unavoidable or not preventable, right? Car accidents, things that people really need high dollar, claims for, but they need care for, which we cover under the Hippocratic Oath and other things. But we need to think about paying for value, right? And so I think there's huge movement of folks, including the federal government, that are trying to push everybody into a value-based arrangement. But unfortunately, we're still paying between 70 and 80% of all healthcare dollars on the fee-for-service chassis. So we're getting paid by how many procedures we perform, not based on how healthy we keep people. And it's an insurance risk game, right? But we built up health insurance very similar to car insurance, and we don't think about it that way. We expect our health insurance and our doctors to keep us well, but what we're paying for is an accident, right? So you wouldn't expect your car insurance to pay for your tire rotation or your oil change or your gas, right? We already know that we're accountable for those things to keep our car running. Health insurance was designed the same way, but yet consumer expectations are that doctors are there to keep you healthy. But the big mistake we made was we started allowing all of our physicians in this country to start prescribing medicine based on what's covered by insurance. And insurance is designed for accidental, not prevention. So that's where we got it wrong. And I think there's a lot of methods that can make it right, but you're talking about transforming the way that an entire part of our economy works, and the largest, fastest growing part of our economy. So it's not going to move quickly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I've seen or read a lot about this idea of value-based care. Are there groups of people in this healthcare ecosystem that oppose the idea of value-based care?
Oh, yeah. Everybody who makes all their money on fee for service. I do think that it's less opposition to value-based care. It's more a balance of, if you think about it from the provider community, you're asking health systems with very, very small margins, right? Who during COVID were operating on negative margins for a lot of reasons. But those very small margins, you're asking them to tear down the way that they make money today and place a bet that they are going to get paid as much or more through value-based arrangements. So they're dipping their toe and they're moving towards it, and they know that it's the right thing to do, but they can't take themselves out of business in the meantime. And there's no backstop for that. But there's not an unlimited number of people coming in. In fact, wait times are getting longer, staff is getting shorter, the maintenance and administration of healthcare is getting more expensive. So there's no way to just tear it down and start it over. So we have to migrate and move it. I don't think there's a ton of people that are opposed to the idea. I think everybody knows we have to get there. But how we do that, we still have to maintain stability in our healthcare delivery system while that's happening.
How far out are we from that being a reality with value-based care? Is it 3 years, 10 years, 50 years? Do you have a prediction for how we are for that being the main driver?
So I would say, in my opinion, we're still 10 to 15 years from really getting there, but it's in different regions. The government has laid down the gauntlet, right? When they launched Medicare Advantage plans, that was the beginning of value-based arrangement. They said, look, I'm going to give you money for what someone is we think they're going to cost us on this regular program. And you are going to make money in a margin based on how much of that you don't spend, right? Mm-hmm. But you have to put a lot of that towards benefits. You can't just keep by denying care, right? So there were some preventative things in there. That got about, on average, just under 50% of Medicare beneficiaries to move into a Medicare Advantage plan over time. Now, we don't have to get into all the details, but a lot of the details of how people get paid, some of them are getting manipulated. So eventually it started costing the government money. But then they launched this ACO REACH program, which was their way of saying, okay, well, now I'm going to try to get the other 50% of Medicare beneficiaries into a value-based arrangement. And I'm going to do that through the providers. So a consumer can say, hey, doctor, I want you to be the one to keep me healthy. And 100% of their Medicare premium goes to that doctor. And so the doctor can learn to, just like Medicare Advantage plans did on the payer side, learn to manage that risk and make money in the margins. But they weren't really set up for the infrastructure of population health. If you think about when you get sick, you have to know that you're sick, make an appointment, go to the doctor. If you know that you need emergency care, you go to a hospital, right? If you need a procedure, those are scheduled. We don't have a system where our doctors have the ability to just make house calls or be the village doctor or come around and say, hey, I noticed that you really haven't had that flu vaccine. I'd like to administer for you today. I'm going to go hit the neighbor up the street. I'll be right back, right? We just don't have that anymore. So we're asking our providers to carry a full book of patients where today they're already only getting on average 15 minutes per person. And then we're asking them to go do more and reach out to all those people that don't know they have a need and aren't coming in. And that's where the promise of digital health can come in order to help facilitate, and where technology can facilitate people knowing that they have a need, getting them into the care, getting them into the right kind of care, and getting the people who are in those facilities who don't need to be in them, getting them out to the right modality of care. So there's tremendous amount of adoption right now in trying to gain efficiencies in the system, reduce physician burnout, and start moving into those models. And so we're seeing a lot of RFPs and buying cycles that are moving in that direction. It's just taking time.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode.
It's a good segue to dive a little bit deeper into the platform and what the company does. I know we talked about the backstory there. Let's talk about the platform. So can you paint a picture for us or summarize what the platform does?
Absolutely. So we do the really unsexy part of healthcare. We solve for the fragmentation of data and the fragmentation of solutions. And what I mean by that in simplest terms is, we're almost all carrying around a smart computer in our pockets, right? We have a smartphone, and on your main page, you can check in at work, you can check the weather, you can check the news, you can Venmo and pay your friends from balances with interoperable exchange for, financials. You can book a restaurant and a car and a ride. But do you have a mobile application that will tell you your longitudinal health record and when you're next due for something preventatively? Like, do you know when you're due for your updated tetanus booster?
I have no idea.
Could you find out quickly?
No.
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 So the thing that is our vitality, it's our life, it's our health. And the fact that we want to be healthy, most people don't want to enter into Medicare with one or more preventable chronic diseases. But that's true because we wait until we're sick enough and we're not monitoring all the way through. And then we're a patient, right? Then we get treated and then we're high cost and we have to spend down our assets as we age, throughout life. So the way that we think about this is consumers and their families. And the reason I say families is really important. And that's because 86% of healthcare decisions in our country are made by women. We need that first screen mobile application that allows us to have access to all the records, not only for ourselves, but every person in our lives that we care for. 60% of the US population are unpaid caregivers. So we have to have the information. I need to care for my 3 children, my spouse, my 2 aging parents that are not living with me, aging in place. I have a sibling with health needs, and we share healthcare data all the time, but I am their healthcare advocate because I work in healthcare, right? I have great connections. I know more. I'm educated in this space. So when we think about the healthcare platform, we think about it from a consumerism perspective. In order to have that first screen mobile application, what would it need to contain? And so everything we do operates under 4 tenets of loyalty. 1, access and transparency to all my health information in one place. The second is contextually relevant communications based on my family's data, meaning I just don't believe that everyone in the country needs a colorectal cancer screening the same month of the year or a flu shot the same month of the year. Most people actually have different timelines in which they need things, and some people can never have a flu shot, as an example. So we need contextually relevant, trustworthy information based on our own data. And so we provide personalized insights on data at scale. The third thing that we do is, well, if you're going to tell me there's something I need to do, please, for goodness sakes, make it easy for me to do it. And so we call this access to care. And that's a combination of in-person, virtual, and digital solution matching. So if we think about, when we need care, if I have a sinus infection and I'm working and I know that it's a sinus infection because I get 1 or 2 a year, right? Then I can do that through telemedicine. But you better believe that if I have a new diagnosis of cancer, I want to be sitting in front of the top specialist for that kind of cancer that I might have in person as fast as humanly possible. But I might also just need help maybe managing my blood pressure in between doctor visits or understanding how does what I eat every day affect my blood glucose if I'm pre-diabetic. So those are digital tools that could be useful. The problem is we were never trained to shop for healthcare. It gets assigned to us. And so as we think about access, we need to help people understand what's not covered from a benefit perspective on insurance. What's it going to cost me out of pocket? Or what are my options? Can I do this through telemedicine? Could I do my colorectal cancer screening at home versus go to an in-person site? And then the 4th tenet of loyalty is what we call the health circle. And that gets back to that family concept. But what it really is a very deep consent framework that says I, as a human, have the right to share as much as little of my health information with whoever I want to at whatever level that I choose. So we think about consumer experience and a platform that can enable that. But in order to do that, we had to solve for healthcare data fragmentation and go connect to all that data in the country, standardize it into one format, put semantic interoperability in place, and make it consumable by the average human, which medical data is not. And then we had to solve for the fragmentation of all of the data points. And we do that using federated identity, where people can drop into and out of different solutions at scale. So they get choice, and it's relevant and contextualized to an individual and their families.
What about the marketing strategy? So let's talk about the marketing strategy today, and then maybe you can talk about how it's evolved since the founding of the company in 2015, I believe, right?
Yeah. So we are, a 10-year-old company, and we did not have a category. And so when we first came out talking about this, first screen mobile application for healthcare, everyone was like, yeah, that sounds great. It's too good to be true. It'll never happen. Right. And so we fought that for a very long time. But the Care Alliance, which we talked about before, as these rules have come out for transparency, at first it was, well, those rules will never be turned into law. Okay. So then they did. The private-public partnership. Well, we'll still create APIs, open APIs that are not interoperable with each other. Oh, yep, we sure did. We created the FHIR standard, the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resource, which was widely adopted, right? Now there are open standards for things like quality measures and algorithms under clinical quality language, or CQL. So, we're definitely, as an industry, coming together to say, how do we do a better job at making all of this work together? I mean, if you think about, well, I'll age myself. When I was younger, I had to go to my bank and my bank's ATM to withdraw my money. I can now withdraw money from anywhere in the world because there's a trust network that exists in the financial industry. Healthcare is going through that moment right at this time. We're a little late to the party. I think we know that, but that is the moment that we are going through. So once that occurs, right, and TEFCA is another good example of the government leaning in to create what holds the promise of being a single on-ramp to interoperability in the country. Then we have people who can connect to that data under the rightful permitted exchange, right, and compete on value. And I think that that's the moment that we're in. We need more of that innovation, not less.
What's the market category? How do you define the market category that you're in?
So it was actually just defined for us. I will say, as a startup founder, we were told and warned by outside firms, inside firms, and specifically our investors, that it is too expensive to create a market category. So we kept saying, well, we don't have a category. We actually operate in 8 different categories, right? So we like to say we're just like a piece of some of those categories, but as a whole, we work together. And of course, I got all the dreaded advice of, this is too big. Can't you just take a piece of this? And I said, well, healthcare doesn't really need another fragmented point solution. What it really needs is something that brings all of that together. So no. And we also went through the time where everyone was a platform, when the actual definition of a platform is that once installed, you can build on top of it, right? And so we're not an app. We don't have a proprietary data model. We're FHIR R4, open standard. We're very transparent around those things. And so the category that just came out this year, almost 10 years in, was healthcare consumer experience platforms. And so we're very excited about it because it got created for us, but it was through years worth of education and maturity of the market to help show that all of these federal rules were not just things that people had to quote unquote comply with, but they were things that they could actually start to leverage to their strategic advantage that, helped their business model. And so as more of the open standards became adopted and everyone stopped saying, well, that'll never happen, right? Then it's like, oh, it is happening. Oh, wait, now it's mandated. Now I have to do it. And so, of course, at that point, our category was created. But during that time, we also went through COVID. And it was very clear that consumers and families were frustrated with healthcare. If you look at like NPS ratings and, some of the studies that have been done, the US population actually likes the US jail system more than they like their health insurance. That says a lot, right? I mean,
That's true.
Yes. And
That's
they legitimately dread having to call their health insurer, right? I literally was in a salon getting my hair done not that long ago. And I was brand new to the area, didn't even know the salon, but a woman comes in and she goes, she was like, I really dislike power washing. She was like, but I would power wash all day long over what I have to do today. I have to call my health insurance company. And I just started laughing. And I was like, my God, we need to make this easier and better, because all she wanted to do was see if her kid's medication was going to be covered, but you could tell this was somebody who had just been completely frustrated with the system. And so one of the trends I like to see now is that a lot of conferences and places where executives come together are inviting and bringing patients and caregivers, and they're listening to the stories of what it's actually like. I mean, my child, we were fortunate enough to get her diagnosed and keep her well from 7 until just 2 years ago. But when we had to go back into the healthcare delivery system with a very sick kid who's now been diagnosed rare disease, precision medicine saved her life at NIH level research and genetic screening. What I will say is that the science of medicine saved my daughter's life. The administration of healthcare tried to kill her every step of the way. It failed us at every single encounter. And so, we need to do better. We need to advance. We need to mature. And we have to make it simpler and easier for people to get care without being held hostage to what insurance is going to pay for. And we shouldn't let insurance dictate the care that doctors provide.
I think we're very blessed. We had our first child 4 months ago and healthy baby.
Congratulations.
But amount of time I've heard my wife just spending on the phone with health insurance, like, I don't want to say it's comical, but it is almost comical, like just how dumb it is. It's probably like, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 hours, something like that, just in the last 4 months, just for very basic stuff. And like, we live in San Francisco and like the heart of tech, like you would think in San Francisco, it shouldn't be so hard. It shouldn't be so complicated, but sure enough, it is. So that resonates a lot with what you're describing.
Yeah. And it's changing. And like I said, I'm optimistic and I'm watching it change. I'm watching healthcare payers and healthcare systems compete now with new entrants like retail, right? I mean, you've got Amazon Pharmacy, you've got Walgreens doing vaccinations, you have all of these retail entrants that are coming in and providing care and services to people in a way that's more convenient. And one thing I can tell you, we know for sure about consumers, convenience wins.
Yeah.
All day long.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their U.S. and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
And I know there was some big news recently from Forrester on the category being announced. Can you take us behind the scenes of the effort that went into making that happen? A lot of founders I speak to, they dream of creating a category. I think every founder aspires to do it. It's very hard to do it. It's very hard to get the analyst firms to do it. You managed to pull it off. Tell us how.
I think there was enough of us that we started working with other companies within our category to say, let's start talking about this together and consistently. So when we first started talking to the analysts many, many years ago, probably 6 or 7 years ago, we were reprimanded. And they were like, where do you fit? Like, where in our categories do we fit? And we said, you don't have a category of where we fit. And they're like, well, what should it be? And so they started asking us questions. They're like, you need to start approaching us with, what is this category? What does it mean? Who competes in it? And how do you know that there's a market for it? And so, believe it or not, it wasn't something that we said, okay, we're going to intentionally go create a category because, again, our investors had said it's too much time and it's too much money. So the way that we did it was we ended up having to put thought leadership out, get on all of the conference agendas, be speakers on main stages and side stages, bringing customers to bear to talk about the pain points of consumer experience. And the fact that if you could actually platform data and information around an individual and bring it all together, that you could create unlimited use cases in healthcare for meeting consumers where they wanted. But at the same time, the only way to get that and make it successful is to show that there's a buying pool, right? So we had to basically say, look, there are now RFPs that are specifically designed around this re-architecture, around interoperability, around having access to a longitudinal health record, and then reimagining and reinventing their consumer experience. And they were doing that because, while there might be a widespread adoption of EHRs, right? It would seem like everybody could go have a MyChart, or another portal access or things like that. But if you talk to the CIOs of those systems, they'd say, yeah, I mean, it's not hard for me to get people to create an account one time, but it's impossible to get anyone to return. So all of what they were investing in with content and education was super important to them, but people weren't coming in looking to be educated about healthcare. And again, it's because we require people to go to the healthcare delivery system versus bringing it to them. I say all the time, like my Instagram feed markets to me better, knows me better than my husband, right? It markets to me, it knows what I like, it knows what I want, and it knows where I spend my time, right? So I can now just forward those things to my husband and say, here's a good idea of something I might want at some point, right? But when was the last time when you got an alert on your phone that it said, hey, Brett, hey, it's really time for you to have that colorectal cancer screening. Did you want to do that in the comfort of your own home, or do you want me to schedule an appointment for you to come in? We don't do that. And as caregivers, especially as moms, we tend to caregive for all of the people in our lives that need help. But in our brains, we're like, oh man, kids are probably overdue for the dentist, probably due for that eye visit. But we're just guessing based on the last time we went and feeling like it's probably overdue, right? So, being able to bring that to people is the reinvention that people wanted. And if you think about what we started with, which is the shift to value-based care, how are you going to get interventions to people before they become a gap in care? And the gap in care is what gets penalized or what gets paid for. How do you have the infrastructure to bring things to people that are contextually relevant, that are going to make them take action? Like, we are not a consumer, healthcare is not created around consumer. Consumers have to operate within the systems of the healthcare delivery system. And we are at the state where we have to do what's called digital transformation, to the point where we are reversing that.
When Forrester came out with that category, did that definition perfectly align with how you were defining the category? I've had a few other founders on where they work with the analyst firms, then the category comes out and it's not their definition, and they've found that to be very frustrating. What was your experience?
Ours was really close. I think Forrester did an amazing job. They picked 33 different things that they measured companies around. And what I will say is that I was pleasantly surprised, that the companies that we see in market in some of the 8 categories where we compete were in that category with us. Not all, but some. And so I do think we offer products and services that fall outside that category, but I do think they got the definition of this one right. So I still think we fit into multiple categories, but I don't think that it's 8 categories anymore. And so that's been really exciting for us. The predominant thing that we do, I think they got the definition right.
Apart from don't do it, which is the advice that everyone has who's created the category, what advice would you have for founders who are out there? They want to create a category. They really feel like they can create a category. What would be like that number one piece of advice for them?
Start talking to the industry about getting loud about the pain points that define the need for the category. A vendor is not going to create a category, not in healthcare. It has to be the buyers saying, I have budget and I am putting money aside for this pain point. And that pain point is what's going to say, okay, well, what solutions in the market can actually solve for that pain point? Then you have a category, right? Because if you're saying, well, hey, if I'm going to go put out an RFI, I'm going to go see who in the market has, what kinds of capabilities. And then I'm going to issue an RFP and I'm going to invite people to participate. When you get enough consistency in that, meaning that there's intentional buying, and you see the same sets of people over and over again in these, categories, then a category gets created, right? And it has to, because the consultants will make it so. The consultants have to help generate the RFIs and the RFPs. They have to define the requirements. They have to understand the pain points. And when they start to say, look, we're looking for companies that can do, A through Z, then they're going to go pull everyone in who has any part of A through Z, but they're going to try to find those that have the majority. And those are the recommendations they're going to make in the RFP.
Let's talk a little bit about fundraising here. We're down to our last couple of questions. So as I mentioned there in the intro, over 100 million raised to date. What have you learned about fundraising throughout this almost decade-long journey?
It's hard. No, I mean, it is. So that's in summary. If I was talking to myself 10 years ago, I would have said, bootstrap it as long as you can, build up, revenue in a profitable way as fast as you can. When we came out, it was definitely more of the, kind of growth at all costs. We fortunately, and probably because I'm a solo female founder, we had never been overvalued a day in our lives. So we didn't have the problem of a lot of those higher growth stage companies. We had to hit very specific milestones in order to raise additional capital, but it was not easy. And so, probably the biggest mistake that we made was early in our journey. I was always told, get a customer, get a paying customer, and then go fundraise, right? Because there's this horrible, especially if you're very early stage and you haven't started fundraising yet, there's this horrible cycle, which is, well, in order to get a buyer, you need a product. In order to have a product, you need money. In order to get money, you have to have a buyer, right? So it's like this impossible, cat and mouse game of chicken and egg, which goes first, right? So it's like, okay, you got to get somebody to believe in you enough that even if the product's not fully ready, that you can get a buyer, right? And so we were really, really fortunate. We had developed enough of a product on a very small kind of family friends, I put money in, some other folks put money in, and we developed this product that we got a payer to enter into a 5-year no out $30 million agreement for. They believed in the platform. They knew we were the team to pull it off. And unfortunately for us, they were a co-op. And back with the, when the ACA and other things came out, well, very shortly after that, the government shut down the ACA program and all co-ops went out of business. So here we were with this very heavy platform at this point that we had staffed up to support an entire health plan medical home model. And we found ourselves without a customer, without any revenue, and without any funding. So, what we learned was you got to be scrappy. We did everything from taking $10,000 and $15,000 checks, to survive through that point. And if you believe believe firmly enough in what you're doing. You just have to do what you need to do to survive in order to get those customers. So while we were patting ourselves on the back that we got this big deal, we were profitable before we launched, and we never really needed to raise any capital at that point, we probably should not have put all of our eggs in one basket.
Oof, that's brutal. Oh, stories that I think are good for founders to hear. I think, sometimes it just looks so glorious. If you read TechCrunch and the big funding rounds and all those types of things, I like to hear like the behind the scenes stories of the pain that founders go through, because I think it is a painful journey. It's a fun journey, but it's painful a lot of times.
A lot of times it's painful all the time. I mean, it honestly is like, it's hard to explain how rewarding it is to see the vision that you've created come to life. The minute that I could see, because my daughter is 27 different patient portals, none of them are accurate, none of them talk to each other, right? And I want her to have her full medical record and everyone who cares for her. So if she's ever incapacitated or hospitalized, someone has the ability to tell a treating doctor how complicated she is. It's life-saving for her, right? When I saw all those records come into one longitudinal record, like I cried. I'm not a crier either, right? And I cried. I was like, oh, thank God. Like this is protective for my child. But at the same time, especially when you're the founding CEO, the early days are the fun parts because you get to work on the problem. You get to see the delight of what you've built and brought forward. As you get bigger and you have more of people's money, it gets harder because the only things that really come to you are all of the problems, right? Because that's your job, is to solve those problems. Your job is to finance the business. Your job is to grow the metrics of the business. And that you don't get to work on the fun parts of why you started the business anymore, right? And it's just important that you recognize that, because the word that I always say, like, if you are not resilient and you don't have strategies for that, you have no business being a founder because it will crush you. But what I will say is that if you are resilient and optimistic and you truly believe and keep going, there are as many rewarding and positive things moving you forward as there are, kind of things that smack you across the face every day. And you're like, man, how did that happen? But I think it's also important for founders to understand. And it took me a really long time to learn this. And I wish someone told me earlier, your identity is not your company. And I think it's really important to know that whether things, because things happen, right? COVID happens. Lots of companies went out of business then, right? There was the .com crash. Lots of companies went out of business then. Right now, healthcare is going through this major transformation, and there's a lot of monopolistic behavior. And some of that monopolistic behavior is taking good companies out of the market. And it shouldn't, because they're great companies with solutions we need, right? So when your company, if it's faced with one of those challenges, one of those unmentionables and like things you can't control, it doesn't mean that you are a failure or what you built was a bad idea. It's not on you. And I think from a resiliency standpoint, the older your company gets, the more you have to recognize this is a business, this is a job, and you must absolutely do the best job possible because you have a lot of people counting on you. But all of those small little failures that happen every day, they're not you. Like you can feel them and you can try to control them, but you can't let them emotionally impact you. And I see so many founders that just feel so deeply that it's not good for their mental health and they start to lose their resiliency. And I just think that that's important to know, is that it is still a business and people are believing in you and you should work really hard at that, but you can't make it your whole presence.
Incredible advice and very important advice. Now, we are up on time, so we're going to end with one fun question here. Let's talk about the vision. So can you paint a picture for us? What's the next 3 to 5 years going to look like? What is that vision?
Yeah, the next 3 to 5 years are going to be fun. What I'm super excited about is for our company, we are looking to move from platforms into ecosystems, and we have our first demonstration of that. So Samsung is a big customer of ours. Actually, later this month, we'll be launching as part of the backbone of Samsung Health. 64 million phones will be natively installed on, and people will be able to aggregate their longitudinal medical record and receive personalized insights on that. What's even cooler, Walgreens, who's another big customer and investor of ours, we've now connected to because they've built out a lot of their APIs. So let's just say you get an insight that you need a vaccination. Could be COVID booster, could be flu, could be pneumovax, doesn't matter what it is, tetanus. We're going to be able to say, oops, looks like from your medical record, Brett, that you are due for your updated, flu shot. Click here to book. And so we'll be able to put a Walgreens pharmacy inside of a Samsung phone natively. And that is an ecosystem. So that is the less cliche version of actually meeting people where they are and making it easier from a simple, button. What I'm excited about with AI, because you can't have a podcast without saying AI or LLMs, right? I think that's a rule now. But what I'm excited about is that we can take our visualization of the longitudinal record and make it conversational. So pretty soon you'll be able to say, hey, what was my average blood pressure over the last 2 years? What was the name of that doctor that I saw for that surgery, when I was a kid? And be able to, converse to get that answer really quickly. So you remember I said, how fast could you find the answer to when you need your tetanus booster? I want to make it seconds. And so those are the two things I'd say I'm most excited about to make healthcare more convenient and simple for people.
Amazing. I love the vision. I really love your story. And I've really loved this conversation. I've learned a lot about healthcare and I'm a bit more optimistic than when we started. So this was awesome. Before we wrap up, if there's any founders that are listening in that want to follow along with you in this amazing journey, where should we send them?
You can send them to our website. It's icanbewell.com. There's no E after the B because B is my daughter, Bailey, who I've called B since the day she was born.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.